Hello, buddy. Welcome back to Tin Man's Core Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'm reading another chapter out of my South Carolina Ghosts from the Coast to the Mountains book by Nancy Roberts. And this one's titled The Spirit with the Trade Street Address. So, without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? I wish I had kept a journal of the strange things that have happened over the last 10 years in this house. It was a raw winter day in Charleston, and we sat watching the flames in the Adams fireplace with our toes near the brass fender. I was surrounded by 18th century furniture and handsome gilt mirrors. My hostess and I sipped sherry from a Waterford decanter, and she continued her story. I can't say I've ever seen it close enough to describe the face. I'm sure we have a ghost living here with us. For years, I would never have believed it, and even now, I don't go around telling people. There would probably be strangers peering in the windows of the house, and we would have to start locking the garden gate. I should hate to do that. Yeah, that probably would be stressful if you tell somebody and then they just start laughing at you. So no, only tell people that you know would believe you, not ones that will make a laughingstock of you. Her well-manicured hands were raised in a gesture of honor, and the blue eyes sought mine for assurance that I understood and would respect her need for privacy. Sometimes I have had friends here and noticed them looking around while they try not to let me see them. That was when we could all hear the sound of footsteps, but no one there. I know it was a ghost walking around, and I know they heard it too. They simply didn't know what to say. We would be sitting in my kitchen talking over a cup of tea when the doors would open and close upstairs, and footsteps could be heard walking down the hall or in one of the bedrooms overhead. Sometimes a table would be knocked over, and that was clearly discernible, for there would be a loud crash to the floor. I would try to think of something amusing to say to distract my guests from the sounds upstairs, and gradually their startled expression would fade. Perhaps because I ignored it, they hesitated to say anything, or they may have thought I had a private friend upstairs whose presence I didn't wish to acknowledge. Although such a situation would be ridiculous in our neighborhood, where we're all known each other so well, everyone's comings and goings are observed, and even the hours we call the cat are common kin. And here's a picture of the house that they're talking about that the ghost lives in. One day my neighbor and I were here in the parlor having coffee when we heard the front door open. We waited expecting to hear a member of the family greet us, but all was quiet. There was a slight pause before we heard the door close, and then we saw a shadow in the shape of a person pass across the wall of the hallway. Strange to say, my first thought was that we were using my favorite Limoges cups, and I wondered if my neighbor would drop one of them to the floor. I looked over at her, and her hand was shaking badly, so I said, "Loretta, why not put your cup on the table and let me heat up your coffee just a bit?" She turned and gave me the strangest look, but at least she put my cup with the gold band on the table. When I glanced back toward the hall, I was distressed to see the shadow was still there, and I hoped Loretta was busy with the sugar and cream. At that moment, she grasped my arm and startled me nearly to death. "Mary, what in the world is out in the hall? You aren't fooling me a bit. Who is it?" All I could do was shake my head. What was there to say? I had no more idea than she. A moment later, there was the sound of a footstep on the first tread. A pause as if someone was staring into the parlor, and then very slowly the footsteps went on up the stairs. We both sat there in absolute silence listening, and after that, of course, there was nothing to do but tell her the things that went on in this house. Loretta was the only person other than my husband that I ever discovered these things with. We had been friends since college, and I knew she wouldn't think I was crazy. Besides, she hadn't seen and heard it for herself. I suppose our visitors would gradually have been frightened away if this sort of thing occurred often, but the ghost usually stayed upstairs, except for those rare occasions when it left the house. I still wonder where it went, don't you? But how does one trail a ghost? As the first months in the house wore on, I became used to these comings and goings. Sometimes the hall light would go on or off about the time the front door would close. Incidentally, I am sure it is a woman. One night I had drawn the drapes and was getting ready for bed when I realized she had entered the bedroom. At first, I stood there perfectly still, not knowing whether to pull my slip over my head or not. I would never have done that if it had been a man. Then I decided there was nothing to do but undress and get into bed. By this time, I had the strongest feeling it was a woman and that she meant no harm. You see sometimes on them ghost shows that you might have some ghostly visitors in your house, but sometimes they don't mean you no harm, and if you are going to sleep, then they'll leave you be. Sometimes. But then occasionally you might hear a ghostly presence scream or knock something over and make you jump up. So those are the ones you got to be careful with. They might not be so nice. The story of the lady who lives in the house on Trad Street will be resumed shortly. An interesting sidelight is the recollection of a nearby neighbor. Soon after her family moved to the street, the house, which now belongs to her friend, was occupied briefly during World War I by a very lovely young lady. She lived there with an older woman presumed to be her mother, although little was known about the pair, for they made no close friends in the neighborhood. Possessed of that beautiful hair, sometimes called Titan gold, and creamy skin, with a delicate apricot blush in her cheeks, the young woman created quite a stir among the men. They would call upon her, and she entertained them in the parlor, the notes of her piano floating out in the darkness many an evening. Some said her voice was like of a nightingale, but compliments were more effusive than at first. Therese, as she was called, seemed to have no favorites, but later it was whispered that just after midnight a limousine would park out in front of the wrought iron gate that opens on the garden at the side of the house. Before dawn, it was always gone. The only excursions Therese made outside the house were for an occasional ride along the waterfront or to post a letter. This made her even more mysterious, as some of the Charleston ladies would stop her on the street on some pretext, such as asking the time of day, and then attempt to strike up a conversation. The answers they received were invariably polite but brief. Finally, one day, Therese confided to a neighbor that her mother was quite ill, and she was on her way to the pharmacy for a prescription. A few weeks later, Therese appeared on the street in an elegant black suit. There were dark smudges beneath her lovely eyes, and her face was pale. She looked a picture of grief. There were some expressions of sympathy, but considerable talk. Two of the ladies of the neighborhood, more curious than kind, called upon her too. Before I continue reading, look right here. There's a picture of a window, right? But if you look right in there, if the light don't blur it out all the way, there's a face showing right here. And they said, who knows behind which shuttered window the ghost appears. That would be creepy to see, for sure. Expressed their condolences, but she met them at the door and pleaded illness. One morning, the curtains were gone from the windows and the house was empty. A tradesman was heard knocking on the door, but no one came. The neighbor who lived next to the garden said she had been unable to sleep the night before and had heard the motor of a car cut off and stopped at the curb outside. When she went to the window and looked out, she claimed to have seen the black limousine and a chauffeur holding the door open for a veiled woman. Some months later, Charlestonians who attended balls in Washington saw a beautiful Titan-haired young woman on the arm of a German ambassador. They were convinced that the lady was the mysterious Therese, and if so, what happened to the woman, supposedly her mother? Was the elderly lady merely playing the role, and was it a masquerade that led to her death? We can only speculate about what happened to the elderly lady and the identity of the ghost in the house on Trad Street. But we don't know that even the grown children of our friend who lives there today will not stay overnight in the house unless their mother is at home. One of my daughters, Carol, who lives in Columbia, saw an elderly lady in a long white gown leaning over her in the middle of the night. Oh man, that would make me jump out of bed for sure. She heard a woman's voice but could not understand the words. Then Carol's nightstand tipped over and crashed onto the floor. Terrified, she jumped from her bed and ran out of the room. I don't know how often she saw the woman. Carol always seemed more sensitive about the ghost than the rest of us. But when they come to Charleston, unless my husband or I am here, none of them will use this house. The cheerful fire has died and left only a bed of glowing embers. The early dusk of a winter's day can be seen between the curtains. At any moment, the front door in the hall may open quietly and the shadow of a woman begin to move across the wall. The end. Well, okay, I hope you guys enjoy that little chapter out of this book by Nancy Roberts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more book reading content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Quarter Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and I said that's a wrap, and have a nice day, y'all.